On today's program, we have the wonderful Lisa Wimberger, founder of the Neurosculpting Institute. Neurosculpting. So what is that? Neurosculpting is a unique form of meditation that Lisa founded, and it is absolutely phenomenal. On today's program, we learn more about that and how we can create new beliefs and maybe even a new brain. She goes into the inner workings of neurosculpting and how we all can use it to relieve stress, anxiety, and maybe create plenty of new habits. How about that? Lisa Wimberger, welcome to the show. Thank you for being on.
Thank you for having me here.
Oh, absolutely. There's so much to talk to you about. Your work is very intriguing to me. Neurosculpting Institute. Folks, go to neurosculptinginstitute.com and I'll put a little note on that toward the end too, so you can find out a little bit more about what Lisa is doing, has been doing, and what you can be doing with her. And I love that you are, among many other things, you have developed a 5-step process of meditation and mental entrainment designed to enhance the brain's natural neuroplasticity, which is a great word. I love that word. Neuroplasticity, while helping to heal and rewrite deep stress patterns. Okay, now boy, that is juicy. that is really deep right there. Can you tell us a little bit, for folks who may not know what neurosculpting is, and there probably are many that are tuning in who don't, what is that, and what do we need to know about that?
Right. It's juicy, and it's a loaded term, so I'll try to help clarify it. Our brain is plastic, meaning our brain molds itself based on every single experience or thought that we have. It's completely adaptable, and it never looks like it once did, which is why it's not elastic. Elastic would be it expands and it goes back to its original form. That's not how the brain works. The brain is plastic, meaning moldable. And science knows this. It didn't at one time. At one time, we thought the brain was fixed and static. We now know that it changes its structure and function based on every single experience we have. So here we have science saying, our brain is completely moldable. So why should we be stuck in any old patterns?
Yes.
This is the general concept. But where neurosculpting came from is that I have a whole lifetime of meditation training. So I've been meditating for since I was 12. So at this point, that's 38 years. No, 36 years. That's a lot of meditation. And meditation for me never quite felt like it was application based. It felt like a wonderful escape, a wonderful retreat, a wonderful coping, which it was for me. But it never felt like it was changing my day-to-day patterns. So then I learned about neuroplasticity, which says, yes, you can change your day-to-day patterns. You could change your mind's conscious and subconscious patterns. You can change your physiological patterns at a very deep level. And I'm thinking, well, okay, how come I don't seem to be able to do this with my stress patterns? So one of my stress patterns was that I was a vasovagal seizure person, meaning I had seizures since I was 15. And they were vasovagal in nature, meaning they were not epileptic. They were incited by cranial nerve 10, which is a bundle of nerves called the vagus nerve. And this was an autonomic response to stress. So here I had a pattern, a deep subconscious autonomic pattern that gave me a very particular stress response. And this stress response would create a very severe body condition. So I'm learning about neuroplasticity. I'm a meditator. I can't figure out what in the world would stress me out so much that I would have seizures in the first place. So that was a big unknown. But what was becoming known to me was that I had more power to influence this pattern than I was told. I was told there's nothing to be done about it. That's not true. So what I started doing was playing with my meditation practice, which at that point in time was decades old. And I said, well, what am I missing here? What am I missing about meditation that is not enabling me to strategically change this stress pattern? I'm missing strategy. I'm missing an understanding of what the brain needs to be teased into that kind of compliance. I'm missing an understanding of how to entrain those patterns so deeply that they become reality. I'm missing all that. So I went to science, and science gave me all that information. So the 5-step process is a sort of a backwards engineered meditation process where I dismantled my various meditation forms and added in pieces of focused attention or physical triggers that were missing, that I now knew could get my brain into compliance. And then when my brain was in compliance, a major piece of the 5-step process is to create a rehearsal script. A script, an action, a vision, an image, a rehearsal of a new pattern.
Ooh,
and
I
and to
like that.
rehearse it, yeah, and to rehearse it in such a highly entrained, predisposed brain that it would become much more neurologically plausible than if I didn't prime my
Okay.
brain.
So I want to back up a little bit here because
Yeah.
there's a few questions that popped out when you were so eloquently sharing that. First of all, did you mention that there is a vagus section in your brain?
Yes, not
Okay,
the kind of Vegas that, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas kind of
I
Vegas.
didn't think so, but
The vagus nerve, yes,
the
it's
vagus nerve.
actually cranial nerve 10 that is governed by the brainstem. That's its origin point.
That's where it is. Okay, and then you, because I was like, okay, ka-ching, and
Right.
then you,
Jackpot.
jackpot, right? You also mentioned teasing the brain uh, into. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I find that interesting.
Yeah. So the brain has many different states, states that correlate to brainwave patterns, state that correlates to what parts of the brain are using blood oxygen and glucose in a dominant fashion. The brain has many different states of activity. When we have a particular kind of dynamic in the brain, meaning midbrain and front of the brain are in some kind of interesting balance, then we can optimize learning. And we can do that in 2 ways. If the midbrain, i.e., structures like amygdala and hippocampus and hypothalamus, if that part of the brain is dominantly charged or active in a fear or threat mode, then we will absolutely optimize learning. That's one type of dynamic that optimizes learning and plasticity. A good dose of fear will get you to learn something faster than any other trick.
Wow, wow.
However, we don't want to keep learning through fear because that keeps us in a stress state. So the opposite dynamic is also true, where if we could shunt blood oxygen and glucose away from the midbrain and towards the front of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, we also enter a state of optimized learning, which keeps fear in check, yet optimizes learning with curiosity and wonder and novelty. So knowing these 2 dynamics and that they both optimize learning, most of us evolutionarily default to learning through fear. We're wired to do so.
Yes.
It's a pretty straightforward survival thing. So we actually have to practice moving activity to the front of the brain so we can optimize learning while keeping fear at bay. Then fear won't theme the learning and will stay out of fear each time we access that information. So really, it's about balancing the relationship between the front and the midbrain in terms of how do we want to prime ourselves to learn in the next moment, to learn a new pattern, to replicate it, or even to unlearn an old pattern. Do we want it themed with fear and then therefore stored with fear, and then therefore retrieved with a fear threat response?
Right.
Or do we want to entrain to it without fear, yet with optimized learning? And that's a dance that the brain knows how to do. But we, as drivers of that dynamic, must know about the dynamic, and we must know how to get there. And that's what was missing for me.
Wow, wow. And is this where the rehearsing of things come in? Rehearsing that, like, for instance, a new pattern, a new way of thinking, a new way of being, in a way, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Actually, the rehearsal comes just after you learn how to balance midbrain and front of the brain. So once you've quieted sort of that stress center and activated the front, your brain is optimized. It's paying heightened attention, and it's ready to map, i.e., learn. So the rehearsal then comes at that critical point. I've just laid out this amazing stage and platform and optimized it. What do I want to unfold / experience on that stage? Because at that moment, since I have all these amazing learning neurotransmitters in their sweet spot, I'm about to believe what I'm going to envision much more than if I didn't optimize my brain. And I'm about to believe it without fear re-stamping it. So that's where the rehearsal script comes in. It comes in after you've primed the brain, and then you rehearse. And in neurosculpting, we rehearse in a very specific way.
Okay, let's talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So we rehearse in a way that forces the user to toggle between left and right hemispheres, particularly in their language centers. Anytime you cross the midline in your body or in your being, you are also optimizing plasticity. So if you want to learn how to walk, you have to counterbalance. If you want to learn how to play a sport, you must counterbalance, which is the same thing as crossing the midline. One thing moves forward, you cross the midline, the alternate needs to move backwards. Transversing that midline is a critical way to learn, and children who don't crawl or learn how to do that are often shown later in life to have things like ADD and cognitive deficits. So crossing the midline physically and mentally is extremely important in learning. So we want to optimize the rehearsal script. We don't want to engage with that script in a lateralized way, the way we normally do. We want to cross the midline. So what we do is we trigger left brain language centers in terms of, in the middle of a meditation, if you're being guided or if you're the user, you're going to learn how to make lists, sequence and order those lists, make priorities in those lists. You're going to spell words in your meditation, and you are going to track to semantic details to trigger left brain language center. And then you're going to get out of there, and you're going to trigger right brain language center by assigning abstract symbology, colors, vibrations, qualities, textures, symbols to the content you just semantically detailed. And the facilitator or user becomes very adept at learning how to toggle. I call it the toggle between those language centers, so that during this amazing new pattern you're creating, or during the breaking of an old one, you're yet again optimizing plasticity by crossing the midline of the brain and stimulating bilateral engagement with this content. It's very strategic, it's very easy, and it gives people entirely new perceptions.
I bet. So what would you say to folks who, well, for instance, I'm a pretty emotional guy. And when I go through transitions, especially big transitions in life, let's say moving or taking a leap of faith or following a quote sign or following my guidance or intuition or something, there are times when I notice that I'm spiraling out and my emotions are really, they're getting the better of me. So this must be beneficial for people who are for lack of a better term, labeled really emotional, too emotional, whatever.
Mhm.
Would you say? I
Mhm.
mean, so what would you
Yeah,
what would you what would you
absolutely.
what would you say to folks who live in that emotional space? Let's say artists, creative people.
Right. What I would say is if you tend to live in an experience of the world dominated by a right brain perception, meaning you tap into the implications of actions, the intuition of the moment, the felt sense of the world, then I would say for you to toggle, start naming those things. If you've got this wave of intense emotion, then what I would say is take a moment to downregulate your breathing and your stress response, and then start spelling the name of that emotion. Start listing words that describe that emotion and start going into left brain language center to participate in that experience, because what you might
Interesting.
do is pull yourself out of the pattern. But over the long term, what I would say is if you learned the 5-step process, you could devise a very specific entrainment script that then entrains you to respond differently to change in the first place.
Right.
So you can use neurosculpting as a pulling you back in the moment, but you could also use neurosculpting as creating a template for a new response altogether down the road. You can use it for both of those things.
So it's rebooting, reprogramming, and on a very, very deep level. So when you say spell out or name the emotions, for instance, let's say it's fear or doubt, you would literally spell it out.
In my mind, I absolutely would. So let me give you an example. Um, let's say I'm a person who generally gets stuck on semantics. You said you'd be here at 5 p.m. It's 5:01. You're late. I'm really triggered. Well, what I might do is I might want to shift out of my very one-sided perception of that. So I might say, it's 5:01. You're late. I'm triggered. Wow. If that whole experience could be a color or a vibration or a texture or a quality or symbol, what would that be? Ooh, that would be sticky and blue. Oh, okay, that's sticky and blue for me right now. And then I would say, where am I holding sticky and blue? Oh, it feels like it's around my throat. And I might just take a minute to imagine the sticky blue, um, I don't know, doing something with it, peeling it off my throat, melting it. I might be creative. But what I'm going to do with my semantic stuckness is I'm going to add in the opposite side perception to round out the experience and pull it out of my pattern. If I'm a felt sense person and, and everybody's, I'm interacting with someone and their facial expression triggers me for no known reason, and I might feel that sensation of being upset or betrayed or judged, and I'm stuck in the feeling, I'm going to go the opposite way. I'm going to name it. I'm going to spell judgment. And I'm going to, um, maybe sequence a list of descriptions of judgment. I'm going to get into the left brain around it. Now, talking about the sides of the brain is a little bit generic and not quite good neuroscience, but there are truths to the left and right brain language center nuances, which is what this plays upon. But that's kind of in the moment stuff. What neurosculpting though is best known for is for someone who perceives themselves to be stressed or reactionary or stuck in a particular story, is to use the meditations to write a new story and rehearse it over a length of time so that eventually they get less and less of a trigger in real time.
Wow. Wow. So we're basically taking full responsibility of our own events and conditions, basically.
Yeah, that's kind of bad news for a lot of us.
Right, right. Do
We're the
you
designated drivers, everybody.
Yeah, yeah. You're driving the ship, steering the ship. So, do you deal with folks who have experienced trauma? Do you have you dealt with folks who have experienced, let's say, something as deep as inherited family trauma or family trauma that's been, you know, kind of run down through the river of one generation to the next. And
Absolutely. And I know you know the great work of Mark Wolin, and I'm a big fan of
yes,
his work.
yes,
And and we speak a lot of the same language, but there are profound ways to heal epigenetic trauma. I have a client right now who we're working in depth with his biological lineage story up through great grandfather, and then his cultural and religious lineage. Um, we carry a lot of patterns um, that get initiated by markers in our DNA.
yes,
And those patterns, though, unfold into physiological responses and perceptual responses. So we actually have the ability to take either the physiological response or the perceptual response, alter it in a rehearsed script over time, which then has an epigenetic effect on our DNA and then those to come. So we quite literally can change inherited trauma and
right.
stop it
Wow. So, what would you say for somebody that, let's say, whose family, I mean, many people um, have families that survived the war, World War II, let's say, or the Vietnam War or the Korean War or something, but World War II seems to come up quite a bit in a lot of the things that I've been writing about, researching, talking to people about. And my understanding from epigenetics and just researching it in my own journey, something is triggered. And so what would you, or how would you approach those who, let's say, had a mother or a grandfather that survived something like World War II in some way that was traumatic and now is living
Mhm.
out some kind of like ghost effect or ripple
Right,
effect, you
right.
know?
The first thing that we always do is let people know we're not into erasing memories or denying what's happened. These are real events. And I think a lot of people don't know that letting them go is different from pretending they didn't happen. Those are two very different things. So the first thing we let people know is we are not devaluing the events that happened in your life or your history. But what we do absolutely have power over is our relationship to those stories in current time. So the first thing I would do with a person like that is I would have them go into the first few steps of neurosculpting meditation where they prime their brain. Then the story I might invite them to tell might be something like, pull up the word mother or grandmother or whoever in the family experienced the trauma firsthand. Spell that word, list some definitions of that person that relates to that trauma. What is the color, symbol, vibration, quality of that person's experience with the trauma? Now we go to a somatic journey. Let's go through the body. Where are you holding their story? And
Wow.
the person will discover where they're contracted. When I say hold it, where are you contracted? Where are you numb? Where are you um, burning? What is going on physiologically that relates to their story, not yours, theirs? And then now can we change the physiology in the moment? Can we deepen the breath? Can we soften that contraction? Can you put your hand on an area that might feel cold to warm it up? What can you do somatically in real time to alter the experience? And then can we store that moment as the new story? The moment of, yes, this really happened, and I softened and released a little bit of mother's story, and now I can breathe just a little deeper. That's like a slightly new version. And we would go layer through layer like this, which is what I do with my clients. If it's epigenetic trauma, we have them define, identify, and assign symbology to the event, to the people involved, to their even identity of themselves, and we start extrapolating everything piece by piece, and then letting the body tremor out or release or soften around it. So we are literally not just changing structure and function of brain matter, gray matter, but we are changing structure of body in response to that thought, going in somatically and going in at the belief level.
Mm. That is deep, deep work. That is deep work. You are, as I suspected, very eloquent in how you speak and how you present the material, and it's very easy for me to digest, as I'm sure it is people tuning in. They're probably getting ahas. I want to talk a little bit about your journey along this path, because I find that, from what I've researched, quite interesting. You started meditating when you were 12. You were hit by lightning when you were 15, and you were clinically dead, it says, multiple occasions. So can you illuminate us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So after I was always a child who defaulted to a sort of freeze response at fear, which is one of the many normal responses we have access to. But after I was hit by lightning at 15, that response seemed to get really exacerbated. So that's when I started having my seizures.
Hmm.
Was that summer right after I got hit. Um, Years and years later, when I happened to have a seizure in a doctor's office, and uh, that's the first time I knew my heart had stopped. I hadn't known that I was having these types of seizures. I would just lose consciousness, usually by myself, and wake up by myself and be mortified, or have gone to the bathroom on myself, or have thrown up and not wanted, and was very ashamed by it. And so I would hide it. But the doctor saw it happen in his office in a routine exam. And what I awoke to was him with a needle of atropine. He was going to inject me to resuscitate me. He said, "Your heart stopped. You stopped breathing. You turned blue. We couldn't get your heart going. I was about to resuscitate you." So that was
Wow.
the first time I realized that my heart had stopped. And that happened many times after that. But what occurred to me was that there was a profound stress response, and he believed, in going through my history, that the lightning hit, which hit at the base of the spine, might have exacerbated a natural response to freeze, which is to play dead. And that now, during stress, that same mechanism of becomes a profound play dead option where I'm seizing. So he believed it was exacerbated, and that stress was my trigger. And so as the seizures got worse, my need to intervene got much more relevant. And after my worst one, where I couldn't breathe on my own, I didn't want to come back. I was done. And my husband had to keep pushing on my chest, getting me breathing and reminding me to breathe. And after that one, I said, wait a minute, I know far too much about this vagus response to let it get the best of me. And I'm going to create a rehearsal script that creates a new response to stress. So what I did when I played with this 5-step process, the script I rehearsed was a replacement script for the seizing. So when a wave of fear and stress came in meditation, I would evoke it, and then I would create a new rehearsal script, as though I was an actress in a play. And I would punch and kick and fight and scream and do all sorts of the opposite of what my body normally did. And I rehearsed that over and over and over again in an entrained mindset. And eventually, the next time a seizure wave hit, that script kicked in. And for the first time in my entire life, I didn't seize. I kicked, I bit, I screamed, I punched, everything like I did in my rehearsal script. And I
Mm.
never seized. And I ended up shaking for about 8 hours and never seized again.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, I've had halos come, but then after that one time of intervening and that new pattern sort of being enacted, the next time a seizure halo came, my body said, "Oh yeah, we don't do that anymore." I just kind of shook a little bit, but the moment just passed.
Amazing. And so how long has it been since you've had a seizure?
Over 10 years.
Over 10 years. Wow. Wow. A lot of what you're talking about sounds like playing volleyball in both sides of the brain. It's like you're tossing something over there, you're tossing something back, you're tossing something over there. I love that visual. That's the visual that came to me. I find it really interesting. Wow. Wow. And so what really led you into this work?
Um, Fear that if my husband hadn't been there the last time I had a seizure, I'd die.
Wow.
And
Wow.
and and my daughter was upstairs sleeping. She was 3.5, and she was upstairs sleeping. And I really don't believe if I had had that alone, that last one, I don't believe that I would be here. And so that lit the fire. And I said, well, I got a daughter and a husband, and I need to fix this. And that's what led me to use myself as the guinea pig and to take my meditation practice and drive it home to application, because I didn't know how to do that. And yeah, that was my motivation. And the moment I interrupted my seizure, or the moment I knew this rehearsal script would work, I knew my mission on the planet. Like, it all just became clear. I'm just supposed to help people move through their stress. Everything from benign, inconvenient stress all the way to life-threatening stress. I just knew that's why I was here. And so I dropped everything at that point, quit my job, changed my focus, and said, I am dedicating the rest of my life to teaching this. And that's what I've been doing.
Wow. What were you doing before that?
I was a teacher, a secondary English teacher. I was a project manager at a huge global consulting firm in the instructional design department. I was a manager of all sorts of education services at different corporations. I was always in education. And I always snuck in this stuff, but not with any real, it was always like as a adjunct to what I did. And then once I moved through my own stuff, I just said, see you later. I need to do this.
Yeah. Wow. And now you work with corporations as well.
I do. I work with police officers and
Yeah.
corporations, and yeah.
Corporate neurosculpting. Okay, what's that like? Because that's a whole new
It's a whole other
breed,
thing.
right? Because
Yeah.
you have, yeah.
Imagine, if you will, the leadership of a major corporation understanding, not just cognitively, but in an embodied way, how to emotionally regulate and access things like empathy and compassion while balancing that with logic, business strategy. Imagine what a leadership like that would do for a company. Imagine the loyalty and the productivity those employees would naturally have, being led gracefully by people who understood this and then role modeled it so those employees could function gracefully with this kind of emotional regulation and balance, which a whole side effect is that it increases cognitive performance. But I mean, and that's like a carrot for the corporate world. But leadership at the government level, at the corporate level, at any level, it's imperative for people who lead people to understand how a human brain and body functions. It's imperative.
Right.
I don't understand how people can lead without understanding how they are leading themselves. And so that's what this is for.
That's a beautiful statement. How can people lead without knowing how they are leading themselves? That's a profound, deep statement. I mean, I get it.
Yeah.
I totally
Yeah.
get it. That's a juicy statement. And so what is it like working with cops, police officers, police departments?
It's been a journey I never expected, and it's been more rewarding than I ever expected. So for some strange reason, 10 years ago, I started with officers. I didn't start with the general public. I like to do things big. And I said, well, if I'm going to devote my life to this, I want to help those stuck in deep, deep pain. And I have a cousin who's NYPD, and he was all manner of archetypal horror story. And I had to help clean up his son, help support my cousin, his wife. It was the archetypal mess. And I went, ugh, cops. what a mess. And then I went, wait a minute. Oh, cops, what a mess. I better help. So literally I just pulled on my personal experience in what I had witnessed, and then I went and I did a whole bunch of research on the industry, and then I approached my first police department in 2007, and I said, I have something you need. And that police department let me in to do a pilot program where I taught their officers how to understand stress patterns, how to identify the vicarious stress of the job, how to understand when they were dehumanizing because of the stress patterns, how to emotionally regulate so that they weren't hypervigilantly trigger happy. I mean, I went in with a large mission to rehumanize beautiful people. 99% of those people chose to be officers because they wanted to make a difference somewhere, somehow for somebody. That's not how it ends up being. And that's not how it ends up looking outwardly from media and from truth. It ends up being a very nasty, calloused journey. And a lot of cops are stuck in pain. And I didn't want anyone who had their finger on a trigger to not know how to emotionally regulate. That seems ludicrous to me, that people who have their fingers on triggers don't get quality emotional regulation training.
Right, right.
And so I started with them, and man, when you see an officer crack open and years of vicarious trauma comes out, and they just look at you and say, this could have saved my family or my career, or this could have saved me from use of excessive force on that innocent civilian. I mean, these are literally stories that I hear. And you see they have a glimmer of hope, and that they can connect back to their humanness, and then maybe have a quality of life outside of the badge that turns them from the hammer into peace officers. I don't know, that was a surprise to me, that I just fell absolutely in love with serving that industry, because they're tortured. And I'm not saying that they don't have a strong hand in torturing themselves and then bringing that out to the community. It's not all black and white, but I would say that it's one of my highest missions, is to get the people with their fingers on the triggers to stop being trigger happy.
That must be amazing. I mean, the after effect and the ripple effect that creates, and especially being in the position that you're in, watching those transformations take place right before your eyes over time or quickly,
I have to say that some of my officers have brought me to my deepest tears in terms of sense of reward. And some of them, quite frankly, hate me. I mean, I've gotten a few hate letters after
Really?
going into an agency of people thinking that I'm so full of it. And, how dare I come in there and even attempt to get them to, go down this path. But that's okay. That's not who I'm there for.
Right, right. Well, I think oftentimes too, when people are confronted with that uncomfortableness that's dwelling deep within, there's that tendency to either want to bolt or not go there. And
Right.
oftentimes we keep learning, as the work you're doing is when you move through it and you get in there and you are able to release it and then be free.
Yeah.
Wow, you have several books as well, and folks, look at the bottom of your screen, especially at the end, especially New Belief, New Brain, and Neurosculpting, a step-by-step, which is an audio program. It's a step-by-step program to change your brain and transform your life. I love this one. The monster under your bed is just
A story in your head.
Tell me about that one.
That one is my favorite. That's brand new. It's the first children's book I've done, and it's to teach children emotional neuroliteracy. So when I teach, I tell a story about how the hippocampus and the amygdala work in partnership to create our stress patterns and how we can override it. But I always use this children's story as the analogy. And I was telling this story in one of the classes, and a woman jumped up and said, "Amen, that is your kid's book." And I said, well, that is the story I've told my daughter a million times. Yeah, that is my kid's book. So I turned it into a kid's book to help children super simply understand that when they're gripped with fear, that they can choose a different story, that they can go into the library in their mind and they can choose a different story with some tricks and tips and techniques, and they can harness the emotions of that new story, and they can self-comfort, emotionally regulate, and self-select the stories they'd like to repeat. And then there's embedded in the story are neurosculpting practices for children, and then there's a little parent guide at the end of how to support your children in this process, because the child sort of acts out pieces of the meditation in the story as they're listening to it. And that one's available. It's super fast read. Kids love it. I love it. And I keep telling it. So
Well,
that's how that one came
that
in.
is absolutely beautiful. That's really true transformation. I mean, you're transforming. I mean, we're talking about transforming the planet, the world. This, it's beautiful. There's so much more that we can go on about. I do want to refer people to the work that you do and the consultations that you do too. It's neurosculptinginstitute.com. Please go there, everybody. I love your little tagline too, where gray matters. I think that's brilliant.
Can I tell you a quick
Please,
story about that?
please,
Okay.
yes.
So that's a triple entendre. So obviously the first meaning of that is we have gray matter in our brain, and that's gray matter is the neurons and the dendrites, the parts that generate the action potentials and receive information. And the gray matter grows with use or shrinks without use. So gray matters. The second meaning of that is that what I have found to be true for the brain is that when we perceive things in black and white, we become rigid and less neuroplastic. So the gray zone is critical to neuroplasticity. So gray matters. But the third and most important meaning of this, which I always feel compelled to say, is that before I opened the Institute, I have a friend, and he calls himself Gray. And he had inoperable brain tumors at the time, and he wasn't doing well. And we were doing neurosculpting with him to help him deal with all sorts of horrible side effects of that. And it was shortly before the holidays, and I woke up from a dream, and he had come in the dream. And he said, you have to open the Institute now. Don't wait. You have to do it now. And I sat up out of bed and I said, gray matters. And I meant him.
Wow.
And
wow.
I opened the Institute because of that dream. So that's really the meaning of the tagline, is it's where gray matters, because he told me to do it.
Wow. I love that. I absolutely love that. Wow. Yeah, I'm just struck by that. That's beautiful. I I always love to finish off with a couple of questions with folks, and so here they are. What's some of the best advice you've been given about life or thriving?
The only way to fail is to quit.
Mm, the only way to fail is to quit. Boy, that's good. That's good. I like
So
that.
that's one, I carry that one with me.
Mm, mm. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Um, and how about this? What's some let's see how yes, that one. Okay. I have a few that swirl around up there. What's the most interesting thing you've been learning about yourself lately?
That I'm still far from, I'm still quite judgmental, quite impatient, quite reactionary, and a little edgy.
Yeah?
Yeah,
Right on.
it's a journey.
It's a journey.
It's a journey.
I know, I hear you. I get it. I get it. I get it. And
Basically, I'm still New York, even though I've been in Colorado for 20 years.
yeah, New York. You know what I love about New Yorkers? You know where you stand with New Yorkers.
Yes, you do.
There's no doubt really. You kind of you just know typically. I mean, I lived in California for 20 something years, and Northern California, where everything was very heart centered and it's beautiful, but
Yeah.
in New York, you just knew
Yeah.
right
My
away.
husband will come in and he'll either look at me like with this furrowed brow or these really wide eyes, and I'll look at him and I'll say, "What are you doing?" And he'll say, "I'm just imitating your facial expression right now." And I won't even know I have it on, but it's the first thing he sees.
Wow, wow. And how about this one more thing? If people wanted to know, if folks listening out there tuning in, want to really explore this, what would you suggest other than going to your website? What would be the first place that you would guide them to go to and learn more about you and get in touch with you? What would you ask? What would you tell them to do?
Two things. One, I would say start with New Beliefs, New Brain. It's the entry point. That book. And on our website, in our learning store, we have a full self-paced immersion called Warrior One. It is the curriculum from New Beliefs, New Brain. It is the fastest, deepest dive into the work. And then you can always email us at info@neurosculptinginstitute.com. And for your listeners, if you use the coupon code NBNB, as in New Beliefs, New Brain, you'll get a discount on that course if you want it. And that's just for your listeners.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Hear that, folks? Do that. Um, wow, Lisa Wimberger, thank you so much for being a part of this wonderful time. Newsculptinginstitute.com, that's where you can go find out more information, find out everything you need to know about neurosculpting and the Neurosculpting Institute. Lisa, thank you so much for being on the show, and thank you for all you do in the world.
Thanks so much for having me. It was great to talk to you, Greg.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. See you next time, folks, on another episode of Mystics in the Chat Room, Conversations with Agents of Change.